you also mentioned radiocarbon dating is always understood to be a panacea in terms of absolute dating. And wherever you don't have absolute dates, those things are often sidelined from archaeological research. We've noticed that quite a bit in a lot of sites that we've been working on, that you and I have personally worked on together. And it has been a problem that sort of permeates into Indian archaeology. A lot of Indian archaeology is written off, even in the Western world, saying it was never really dated. And there were carbon content and there were other things, and never ever did anybody go on for a radiocarbon date for this, primarily because it's costly, and
Mhm.
secondarily because you don't really have the kind of resources to get your sample across to where the dating is possible. But there are issues with radiocarbon dating, and these issues needed to be discussed. And I'm so glad that this is the topic that we sort of chose to do today. We have a lot of questions coming in, and the first one here is from Diptarak. Rather, we have two questions from Diptarak that I'll be taking side by side, and then I'll move on to other questions by the attendees. So the first one is, do you think it's important to establish isotopic baseline data from the research in order to understand the rate of C14 decay in different scenarios?
Um, I think so. It baseline data usually is seen more in case of provenance studies. So isotopic baselines are made for geological studies. Strontium baselines are made. Even lead isoscapes, as we call them, isoscapes have been made because that the geology does not change. But for carbon dating, making a baseline is going to be problematic. We have a fairly uniform kind of equation for dating artifacts. We know that 5,730 years is the date since when half decay occurs, and so we can date them. So there is a matter of consistency that already exists, and that can be used for dating. I don't really think so. Maybe I should read more on this, but I don't really know if baselines would work for carbon dating. Um, I think so. We can maybe look at the other question. Uh, yeah. So, do you think
Oh, sorry,
multi?
I was reading it out and realized I was on mute. I did exactly what you were doing a minute ago. What I wanted to do was take up one question from the research wing and take
Mhm.
up one from the chat box. So this one is from Anya, and she says, what are the best preservation conditions for isotopic samples?
Uh, Mom, I just lost a bit of your voice. I could not really hear it. Just a second.
I
Could you
will
repeat
repeat
it?
it again.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
So it says, what are the best preservation conditions for isotopic samples?
Oh, okay. The best preservation conditions are ideally the ones where the object is in a state where it has not been disturbed, it's in a particular context. And the thing is, for preservation, contamination will occur. Contamination would occur because carbon will react with other substances. Other elements present in the sample would also react with other elements. And so you cannot really go away with contamination. The best that you can do in this case is to make sure that the artifact that you find um, has contamination that can be removed from it, manually as well as chemically. And also something important is to understand that since we're talking about also about bones, um, bones would turn into fossils, and organic material will be lost. So as long as there is organic material left in it, to be honest, it's in a good state of preservation.
So going back to the chat box, again, second question by Diptara goes, do you think multi-proxy isotopic studies can help produce a more robust interpretation for C14?
I think so. Yes, if we are taking talking about isotopic studies, if we are going through different isotopes, if we are dating it through different mechanisms, we can get more robust interpretations. So yes.
Thank you so much. The next one is by somebody also called Bhavya, also in the research wing, but this year. And she says, what are the potential future developments in technology of radiocarbon dating as per you?
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the major issues with radiocarbon dating is that the sample is lost, even if it's micrograms, even if it's milligrams, the sample gets lost. But the problem is that this, even from 1950s to 2024, so literally 75 years, this problem has not been able to solve. And while there are ways through which you can get more efficient results, more precise and more quicker results, the problem remains the same in a number of cases, and therefore, if there's a way that we can um, date the artifact without destroying the sample, that would be the most important innovation that could occur. But again, this is something not easy and cannot be done like just by saying it. So that would be my take on this question.
I mean, of course, we can all dream of things that might happen, and we never know. A few
Mhm.
years ago, nobody would have thought, until Libby came along, nobody would have thought radiocarbon dating was possible. And now it is. And the field of archaeology, specifically archaeological science, is such that you have new developments taking up every now and then. So a while ago, we all believed there was no interbreeding among Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. Now we know for a fact that not only did they interbreed, but we have 3% of Neanderthal DNA. Some of us do, some of us don't. And
Mhm.
that changes from people living from one occupational area to another. So when you have things like this developing in science, the discoveries that we make with the same set of fossils that have been lying around in our museums forever, or the same set of organic sample that has been with us forever, is there's no end to how many potentialities can develop. And speculating on it right now would seem dreamlike, but you never know. It could happen, it couldn't happen. A related question, and this is from the chat box, is by Dave, and he says, does isotope dating show good reliability in repeated dating of same artifact?
This isotope dating. Um, yes, it's very similar to the earlier question. If you are dating an object multiple times, now it also depends on which technique you are using and what is the new element that you are introducing in your dating. So, for example, if I there was this paper where lead isotope analysis were conducted to understand the origin of lead ingots. And the researchers, the ingots were dated twice by different equipments, but the idea was same, that lead isotopes have to be dated. And in the other one, they also added something called trace element analysis. So again, a more wider line of understanding of the isotope. It can give more reliable results, but then it has to be understood that what are you achieving through your study. Something that I also wanted to mention, and ma'am mentioned this briefly, is that radiocarbon dating is expensive. In a lot of cases, researchers, before working on any sample, have to justify, like, why are we even dating it? Why, what the study would entail, or how it will help. Because to receive funding or to receive access to laboratories, it is important to tell why are you dating a sample again, which has already been dated and the results have been published. So you have to be very clear about what you have in your mind if you are conducting multiple studies.
This brings me to another related question, and this is again by Anya. She says, what are the ethical concerns in sampling human remains from isotopic studies, especially regarding ancestral communities? So, anthropologically more than archaeologically, for that matter.
It's such an important question. I want to address this specifically because I remember reading on this problem that exists, especially in case of Northern America. So for understanding the Native Americans, to understand more about them and their lifestyle, uh, the bones had to be dated, but had to be dated as well as to understand their DNA, the bones had to be sampled. But the sampling could not take place because it is an ethical concern that why do you think we would be providing the bodies of our ancestors, the samples of our ancestors for your laboratory work? So this is a dilemma that still exists, and in fact there have been court cases that have taken place in American history. And while this is an important ethical concern, what the researchers believe is important to understand that isotopic studies or DNA studies on any sort of community or any sort of specific community can have its implications, which have to be discussed with the members of the own community. The first ethical concern is always going to be honest about what your research aims are and to talk about this to the communities that you are dealing with. You cannot, you can do maybe excellent research, you can get fantastic results from isotopes that you may not have thought of, but if they have been sourced unethically, the practice would not make sense. The practice should not be followed or preached.
That's a very good answer. That's a very diplomatic answer, but also ethically, that's a very sound answer, Bhavya. Well done on that. We have another question by Anya, which goes: are archaeologists able to determine the percentage of contamination in a sample? If yes, what are the methods to do so?
Okay. So to understand contamination, let's say if your object has so that's also something. The first part is that in a number of cases, archaeologists, again, it depends on what equipment they are using and the sort of expertise they have on the subject. But in a number of cases, they might not be able to detect contamination, especially the new and the older carbon problem. So if new carbon has been added to your older sample, then you cannot really detect contamination. But it is through this entire mechanism of the spectrometer. So maybe we should be discussing spectrometer in detail, that you can understand ionic movement and through magnetic currents, where you can see what was the older sample that was added and what was the newer sample that was added. And in order to be more precise, the only way around is to not just rely on one sample, to rely on as many samples as available, and then arrive at a mean date. So in some cases, coming like returning back to the question, describing contamination is difficult, but if contamination has been found out, then it can be addressed in percentage format. In most of the cases, it can be done.
One more question, and this one I think is also a prompt for the next lecture from Bhavya on similar topics of isotopic dating, which is OSL versus radiocarbon dating, situational pros and cons of each. Would you like to address it now, or do you want to do a separate talk on that? Because we are going to do similar talks, people.
Uh, maybe we can maybe we can just say, ma'am, that OSL has a very different like approach towards study in isotopic studies, and radiocarbon has a very different approach. The materials both of these technologies rely on are very different, and the methodology is different, and so are their results and interpretations. I think that's enough, ma'am, for this
I think
talk.
that's enough of a spoiler. So, Dave, if you want an answer to this, remember that we are going to talk with the same expert next week on another isotopic dating, and we will be releasing flyers to that soon after. But yes, we are going to talk about the pros and cons of different kinds of isotopic dating, because this is something that is never discussed. This is something that is always believed to be the answer or the panacea, like I said, to all archaeological problems, which it is not, and which is why we are having these talks and we're hosting this talk. One last question, I think, is from Disha. She says, does carbon dating help us understand the reuse and repair of artifacts or prehistoric tools by their original users?
Um, so if we are talking about prehistoric tools, stone tools are mostly inorganic. and you can't date them through carbon dating. But that being said, in the recent period, so if we come across the Iron Age or ahead of Iron Age, there are tools of organic material. There are certain composite tools that might survive. It's rare, but and so we can maybe date them. And if it's a very hypothetical situation, a very if situation. If you have, let's say, a bone tool, and it is hafted on wood and somehow it is preserved, so it will give different dates, and through that maybe you can tell that the bone might be earlier than the wood, or vice versa, and that can tell us about the tool being manufactured or repaired or something like that. But it's a very if situation. In prehistory, definitely an if situation.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I think that brings us to the end.